In order to provide the services that we rely on day to day, plenty of organizations have a genuine need to work with PII data, that is, personally identifiable information. Think of banks or hospitals, insurance companies, telecoms, credit card processors. Limiting the exposure of such sensitive data to only those individuals who need access when they need access to do their jobs, that's a standard we should hold all of these organizations to. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to use a subset of Foundry's data security capabilities in order to bring a common customer service workflow more in line with best practices for handling PII data. You'll learn how to use markings, encryption channels, and checkpoints in order to restrict access to sensitive data and track when it's used for legitimate reasons under appropriate circumstances. What we've got here is a rudimentary inbox app for customer service agents to handle complaints. As with my other tutorials, all of this is notional data for the imaginary Ontologize theme park. Now, most people who visit the theme park have a wonderful time, but some don't, and they file complaints. Our customer service team is responsible for addressing and resolving those complaints. For example, this person lost their ice cream cone to a giraffe, this person had bed bugs, this person is complaining about our high prices. All pretty typical stuff. I do see one issue here, which is that all of this PII data, last name, gender, date of birth, etc., is plainly visible to all customer service agents at all times. And because customer service agents need access to the guest object type, they can see everybody's information all the time. This is anything but best practices when it comes to handling PII data. Now, you may be looking at this and saying, that's not especially sensitive data. And compared to bank accounts or medical records, you'd be right. Part of that has to do with the backdrop of this tutorial being an amusement park, and I sure hope no amusement park has that sort of data. But I would also assert that the principle of least privilege should guide all organizations in how they manage so-called regular PII data. And all the capabilities I'll be showcasing here are just as applicable to higher stakes data as they are to phone numbers and birthdays. So let's start by taking a look at a version of mandatory controls called markings. In Foundry, a marking is a way of restricting access to some resource. A resource could be a dataset or a code repository or some analysis. Basically anything in Foundry is a resource. And so in order to do something with a resource that has a marking on it, including even seeing it, a user needs to have access to that marking. A version of this that we're probably all a little more familiar with is like top secret documents in the intelligence community. You can tag a document as top secret. And in order to have access to the document, you need to have top secret clearance. So Foundry's markings are just a more general purpose version of that. You can tag a resource with a marking. That's like putting a top secret stamp on a document. And you can grant access to that marking to individual users. That's like giving someone top secret clearance. We're going to use markings to restrict access to the data backing the guest object type. So let's see how we do that and what the consequences of doing that are. Now I'm back as my regular user, which you can tell because I'm using the different color banners to differentiate when I'm acting as the data administrator versus acting as the customer service agent. To create a marking, you need to go to settings, and obviously you need to have permission to create and manage markings to do this. I've already set one up here, and markings have marking categories and individual markings. So I have a marking category of sensitive information, and within that, we could have like a marking for employee PII data, we could have one for guest PII data, we could have like other types of sensitive information, and that's how I would group these. Another way of grouping markings that's pretty common is like by geographies, right? So maybe your organization has some operations in Europe, and there's a European marking and there's a North American marking, and those might be in the category of geographies, for example, or regions. Here we have a guest PII marking, and details include, a little description here, marking permissions. These are permissions about who can manage this marking, and then members, who is a member. So to apply a marking, we need to go find a resource to apply it to. And in our case, that resource is the data backing the guest object type, which is in this project here. It's that file right there. Now, we also have this downstream data set, which we'll get to in a minute, called guest encrypted. It is, in fact, not yet encrypted. We will be making it encrypted. Let's just take a look at the data and see what it looks like now. So this is the raw data as it came in from whatever source this guest data comes from, and nothing is encrypted. We can see all the PII data right now. Again, this is notional data. So let's go back, and then if I select this resource, I can manage access because I am the owner of this file. Now, other users might be able to have view access, but not the permissions to manage who else has access to this file. You need the right permissions to apply markings to a given resource, in addition to the permissions to apply markings in general. So I'm going to click View, and then, okay, you have to be a member of the Ontologize organization, but currently no markings are required to have access to this resource. I'm going to click Add, and then we're going to search for the guest PII marking. Click that checkbox, hit Save, and now the marking has been applied. So we have this little badge here indicating that a marking has been applied to this resource. And you'll see this badge in other applications like Pipeline Builder or a data lineage app. It's something that shows up pretty much everywhere in Foundry when you can see a representation of this resource. And if we refresh the page, we see that this other data set now has that marking too. This is because guest encrypted, which again is not yet encrypted, is downstream of the data set we applied the marking to. Foundry propagates markings through the dependency tree of various resources. So if you apply a marking to one dataset, all the downstream datasets, even if they're in different projects, will continue to have that marking applied to them, which means that the restrictions that that marking imposes will continue applying on all those downstream resources. Let's see what the impact is on the customer service user. Now we're back as the customer service agent user in Object Explorer, just like before. However, now we don't see any guests. And that's because this user, as I mentioned previously, doesn't have access to the guest PII marking, so they can't access any of the data of the data sets that marking has been applied to. That means that in the ontology, this object type, which depends on that guest encrypted data set, that's not going to show up for this user anymore. If we go to the Inbox app, we should see a similar thing. Great, we can still see the complaints because we have maintained access to that, but we can't see any values for the guests, even if we click into here. It just says no object selected, and that's because we don't have access to the underlying object type anymore. Now we've gone a bit too far because obviously the customer service people can't do their jobs if they don't have any access to guest data. To fix this, we're not going to totally remove the marking. However, we will stop propagating it. And in order to continue protecting the PII data, we're going to introduce a new capability, which is encryption channels. Let's go see how those work. Now we're back as my regular user. You can think of it as an admin user. And we're going to create an encryption channel through this application called Cipher. To do that, I'm going to click New, search for Cipher, create a Cipher channel. A Cipher channel is a way of letting us create a mechanism for encrypting data with a particular key, and then assigning licenses to various users or user groups to do certain decryption or encryption actions based off of that key. So I will give this a name, which is, I'll just call this guest PII channel. I'm going to go with deterministic encryption, hit next, and then I'll let Foundry generate a key for me. Great, and now we're done. The next step is create a license. And so the immediate thing I want to do is encrypt those fields of that data set. So to do that, I need an admin license because I'll be using Python transforms to do this. So I will just call this PII admin license. And I don't need to allow decryption. I do need to allow encryption. And I acknowledge the risk here, hit submit. Great, now we have this license. Going back to the project, we now have two new resources here. One is the guest PII channel, and one is the guest PII admin license. So using that license, I can then go into my Python transforms repository and start encrypting these columns. Great, so right now this transform is not doing any encryption. It's just kind of like an identity transform, taking the input dataset and passing it as the output dataset. Let's change that. So I'm going to create a new branch, Taylor encrypt fields. And then I'm going to grab this code that I already wrote. And what this code does is in lines 18 through 21, say for each of the columns that I want to be encrypted, use this particular channel in order to encrypt them. And that particular channel is specified in the transform decorator here, where encryptor equals encryptor input, and then I just give the path to that resource, which is in this same project. So it'll use that channel, its key, to do the encryption for these columns. Now, the encryption will only take place after I commit this, create a PR, merge it back into master, and then build it on the master branch. So let's do that now. All right, my PR has been closed, and if we go back to the master branch here, we see that, yep, the code is updated, and these columns will be encrypted now. So let's build this and see what effect that has now. Okay, our build's done, and now we can see that the data looks pretty different. Instead of being able to read the last name or the gender or date of birth, we have this cipher, then this RID. That's information pertaining to the channel that was used to encrypt this data. So now this is what people see for this downstream data set. The next step is to stop the propagation of the guess PII marking. We've encrypted these values. We no longer need to restrict access to the entire data set because those values are protected now. To do that, we're going to modify this input dataset argument of the transform decorator here. And all we're going to do is tell it which marking should stop being propagated and on which branch. So let me update the code to do that now. With this code updated to stop the propagation of this particular marking on the master branch, let's build the dataset and observe the impact on the customer service user. Once this build finishes, the marking will no longer be propagating to downstream datasets, and then we can take a look at what's changed. All right, build's done. Looks the same from this vantage point. Let's go to the project view, however, and see what's changed. This dataset no longer has the marking badge, and that's because we've stopped propagating the marking to downstream datasets. Now let's switch over to the customer service agent view and see how their data access has changed. Now we're back in the same project, but as the customer service user, and you'll notice a couple of different things. For one, we can now see this dataset. For another, although we can see the channel, we can't see the admin license, and that's because I didn't mention earlier, but I also applied the same guess PII marking to that license, so that only the fairly small number of admin users who need to be able to encrypt that data have access to that license. Additionally, as before, we don't see the guess raw dataset because that still has the marking on it. If we click into the guess encrypted dataset, we can see that we have the same view as what we were seeing in the transform as the admin user. We can see first name because we didn't encrypt that, customer ID for the same reason, but last name has this Cipher RID here, so as gender and date of birth and phone number. In order to restore full functionality to the complaint inbox app, we need to do two more things. One, issue an operational license to the customer service agent so that they can decrypt individual values on an as-needed basis. For example, if you're going to call someone to talk to them about the complaint, you probably need to decrypt their phone number first. Secondarily, we need to go into Ontology Management app and change the schema of this object type. When we encrypted those fields, we changed their type from a date or a string to a new type that takes into account the fact that they are encrypted. This introduces a schema mismatch from the dataset that we're syncing into the object backend store, and that causes the indexing job to fail. So even if we issue that license, since the new data can't get synced into the object backend store, there just won't be any data in the app. So let's go quickly take care of those two things. Okay, now let's create a license for operational users to be able to decrypt certain fields within the Inbox app or Object Explorer. To do that, we're going to go to the channel, and we're going to create a new Cipher license. This one for operational user license. I'll call this guess PII ops license. We don't need to allow encryption, we do need to allow decryption. On top of that, I'm going to enforce a rate limit, that is a quota on how many times per day a given user can decrypt values. So let's set that at maybe 70 values per day. And so this is individual fields. So that's probably 2 per any given ticket, phone number and last name at the very minimum. So 35 tickets over the course of the day, that seems pretty reasonable. And above that, well, they just can't decrypt any more values. And while we're here, I just want to emphasize how I've got the other permissions set up for this project. So for this project, if we go to access, we can see that everyone in the organization is granted the discoverer role, which means they can see that files exist here, that the project exists, but they can't click into the files and see their contents. So most people can see guests encrypted that it exists, but they can't see its contents, or they can see that this channel exists, but they can't edit it, they can't view it, things like that. And what I've done to enable the customer service workflow is go to this particular dataset, guest encrypted, and added that group, customer service agent group, as a viewer of the file, which will let them operate on that data in the ontology. I also need to add them as viewers of the guest PII ops license. Now we can move on to reconfiguring the ontology. Here we've got the guest object type, and we can see that under data sources an index failed. And again, that's because there's a schema mismatch between the newly encrypted data that is being fed into the object data store and the configuration we had previously in the Ontology Management app. To fix that, let's go to Properties and change some of the types of these properties. We'll start with date of birth. Previously this had been date, but now it's an encrypted value. It's not a date anymore, at least from the perspective of all the applications that engage with that encrypted value instead of the underlying decrypted value. So to change this, we're going to pick Cipher text, and we're going to do that for all the encrypted fields. So gender is also Cipher text, as is last name and phone. Okay, we'll save our changes to the ontology. That'll kick off a new index, as happens whenever you change the schema of an object type. Now that we've fixed the schema mismatch problem and issued a license to operational users, finally our customer service agents can resume using the Complaints Inbox app. Now we're back as the customer service agent user, and then as a quick aside, here's what it looks like when you have Discover access to a project but not View access. You have the ability to request project access, but you don't have any other abilities here. And again, because the customer service agent group was granted view access to the ops license and the guest encrypted dataset, well, you can view those even though your default role for the entire project is just a discoverer. Yeah, again, we've got the encrypted values here. We can see the rest of the data. That looks pretty fine. So if we click on guest, this will take us into Object Explorer where we can see all the results here. And we can see that, yep, we can see some of the fields, but we can't see all of them. However, now, since I have a license to decrypt data, again, me being the customer service agent user, I can decrypt some of these values. So I just click there. It says, hey, here's a decryption request. It's like my email, my username, that is. Here's the time I did it, or will do it. I have to click submit to actually decrypt the value, and it tells me how many requests left, because again, I set a rate limit, a quota per day of how many decryption events one of these users can do. So I'm going to click submit just to show us what this looks like, and then the real value is shown here for me, and again, I can call this person to resolve a complaint if necessary. Let's pivot to the Inbox app here, see what that looks like. So yeah, we can see the guests now, and let's try resolving one of the complaints. Click on this one from Selena, who is annoyed that the wait for the roller coaster was for nothing because it broke down. And to access the phone number, I would just click on the encrypted value. It tells me how many decryption requests left I have for the day. I click submit, and now I have the phone number to call this guest and maybe offer a coupon as an apology. Then I can click resolve complaint, change the status from open to resolved, and say what the resolution was. Called Selena and offered a 50% off coupon for the next park visit. Resolve complaint. Back here, and that one disappears from my list because we have a default filter for only the tickets, the complaints that are open, but we can see that if we go click on the resolved ones, here are the resolved ones. This is much better than it was before. No longer do all customer service agents have access to all guest PII data by default. It's only on an as-needed basis and per field. So even if you need to decrypt the phone number for someone, doesn't mean you need to decrypt the gender or the birthday. If you need those, you have access to them because that's how I set this license up, but you don't have view access by default. Although this is much better, we can do better still, and that's by adding what's called a checkpoint. So let's go take a look at checkpoints and see what they can do for us. The checkpoints application in Foundry allows you to track certain actions users take throughout the platform and prompt them for a justification for that action. Common examples include downloading a file or decrypting data. By prompting users, we can remind them of data handling expectations and record a reason why they needed to take that action. This information is logged for review if needed. I'm going to set up a checkpoint for decrypting guest PII data. To do that, I go to the Checkpoints application and go to Configuration, click Configure New Checkpoint. The checkpoint type will be Cipher Decrypt, but as you can see, we have all these other checkpoint types available to choose from. I'm going to, for the Ontologize organization, that's correct. I'm going to add a condition where the condition is it will apply to the users in the customer service agent group. Hit next, and this will be the guest PII. Oh, this is the title of the prompt, not of the checkpoint. So why do you need to decrypt the guest PII? Prompt, please provide the reason. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. We don't need a description. Hit next. And now you can choose between an acknowledgement. This is useful for, a message like, oh, by the way, you're not allowed to upload certain types of data through the front-end import. A drop-down, which could work for our case, if there were a set number of reasons why you could decrypt this data. I think that's actually pretty realistic for this workflow. I'm going to go, however, with a free response. I don't need any validation for that, and I don't think I need any placeholder text. Again, this is pretty self-explanatory what's going on here. I'm going to hit next. And the checkpoint title, this is for people reviewing the logs, how this is going to appear there. So I will say guest PII decryption checkpoint and create checkpoint. Okay, now let's take a look at what this means for the customer service user. All right, I'm back in the complaint inbox app. Let's try to resolve one of these. Oh, I think I'll click on this one. Marja got pickpocketed. So like before, I'm going to decrypt the phone number. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so like before, it tells me how many requests left I have, but instead of just giving me a submit button here with my username and the timestamp, I now have that prompt and I need to provide a reason why I need this data. I need to call the guest to resolve the complaint. I'll hit submit. And now that is logged and I have access to the phone number. Now let's go see what that looks like in the checkpoints app. We can see there's one more event in the checkpoints log, and it's by the customer service agent. If we click on that, we can see the user justification provided, and we can see other details as needed, such as metadata, like, what was the Cipher channel used, what did the checkpoint say to the user. All this is very useful if you need to review the events in the checkpoint log. Additionally, you can filter by date or by resource or user, and all of that will aid in whatever auditing workflow you may need to do. Our complaints inbox app and the guest object type in our ontology are now both in much better shape when it comes to how we're handling PII data. To recap, we added markings to protect the unencrypted raw guest data. We use Cipher encryption channels to encrypt certain columns in that dataset and properties in the ontology. We issued licenses to an admin user to use transforms to do that encryption, and operational users, customer service agents, to decrypt those values in the context of their workflows. We added rate limits to that decryption so that no one user can start trying to abuse the system. And we added checkpoints so that we can prompt users for why they're needing to decrypt that data, and we can track those over time. Markings and encryption channels and checkpoints are just a subset of Foundry's data security capabilities. There's also projects and organizations and roles and more. And all these interact to offer a very flexible and powerful data security framework. If your organization wants to learn more about data security in Foundry, feel free to reach out to my business, Ontologize, which offers live trainings and self-serve courses that teach people how to use Foundry effectively. As always, if you have any suggestions for future tutorials or questions about Foundry, email me through the contact form on my website, ontologize.com, or message me on LinkedIn. I'll see you next time.